Mrs. Hemsworth, I heard today is your wedding anniversary, but I wanted Nick to come to me and he did. He knows it makes me happy. I heard he gave you a yacht. I'm so jealous, but he gave me a private island, haha. I turned off my phone and took a deep breath. My pillow was slightly damp. I grabbed a new one and lay down again. I dreamed of the past. When I was a child, I was abandoned by my parents and raised myself with social aid and scholarships. In high school, I met Nick. He was a vibrant young man, completely different from me. I was always quiet and reserved. The burdens of life and my past made me unwilling to interact with others. But back then, Nick was like a blazing sun, capable of melting any ice. His allowance wasn't much, yet he'd rather go hungry than give me most of his money to make sure I had enough to eat. Later, we got into college. Holding his acceptance letter, Nick came running to me and asked, "Helen, will you be my girlfriend? If you don't want to now, that's okay. I'll wait for you anytime." Looking into his anxious eyes, I nodded. Visibly relieved, his face lit up with joy. He picked me up and spun me around, nearly tossing his acceptance letter in the process. At 19, Nick snuck out of the boys' dorm late at night to wait for me in the freezing wind. I dashed to him as fast as I could. Smiling, he took off his scarf and wrapped it around my neck, but it was still cold. To see each other, neither of us wanted to wear bulky clothes. He grinned at me foolishly and said, "Helen, one day, I'll get you the warmest fabric. My Helen deserves the best." He did fulfill that promise eventually, but he lost his sincerity along the way. In my dream, I asked him, "Nick, would you ever lie to me?" Nick in my dream shook his head firmly. I asked again, "And what if one day you change? You deceive me and have another woman?" 19-year-old Nick hugged me tightly. "I won't, but if that day ever comes, never forgive him." I nodded. I wouldn't forgive him. When I woke up again, Nick was already dressed and had prepared breakfast. His movements were calm, as if he hadn't left last night at all. He said cheerfully, "Helen, today I'm taking you to see an active volcano." This year, while watching a documentary, I casually mentioned something, and Nick remembered it. He said, "The team over there said it's predicted to be relatively safe these days. I've already arranged everything, Helen. Just follow me." After breakfast, he had already packed my luggage. Anyone would praise him as the perfect family man. I once dreamed of watching the Earth's pulse with Nick, sharing every moment worth remembering. Now he was still with me, but his heart was with another woman. He kept glancing at his phone, a look of unmistakable tenderness on his face. I glanced over and asked, "What are you looking at?" I thought he would panic, that he would explain, but he calmly handed me his phone without hesitation. "I've adopted a shark. I was just checking its location." I lowered my gaze and saw a cartoon shark icon with the name Yvonne on its head, along with longitude and latitude coordinates in the corner. He appeared composed. If I hadn't seen the chat interface reflected in his glasses earlier, I might have believed him. "Nick, you lied to me again." I handed his phone back and casually asked, "Why did you name it Yvonne?" That woman's name was Yvonne Chadwick, and he called her Yvonne. Nick's pupils contracted as he carefully studied my expression. Seeing no change in my demeanor, he let out a subtle sigh of relief. When I first adopted it, it liked swimming south, so I gave it that name. I kept asking, "When did you adopt it?" 3 or 4 months ago, he answered. So it had already been that long. He clearly didn't want to dwell on the topic. "If you are interested, I can help you adopt one too. Watching it occasionally is quite stress relieving." Stress relieving? Was that his excuse for keeping another woman? I didn't respond to him. Turning away, I couldn't help but bend over slightly. He was quick to support me, asking nervously, "Helen, what's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? Should I carry you?" There was still some distance to the volcano. Swallowing the nausea that surged up, I shook my head and said, "The path is rough. Don't carry me. He reached out to hold my hand, but I quickened my pace and walked ahead to a spot closer to the volcano. At the moment when the magma erupted, it felt as though my heart resonated with the planet. As the scorching heat enveloped me, the sour pain in my heart seemed to evaporate. Amid the roaring sounds, I thought I heard someone shouting my name. At some point, Nick had come to my side. He held me tightly, leaning in as if to kiss me. I dodged and he asked, "Hurt? Why did you avoid me? Didn't you want a photo in front of the volcano?" He remembered my joking remark about kissing in front of a volcano. At the time, I had just finished watching a movie and was struck by how the protagonist's love was as pure and intense as magma. He had kissed me then, saying with a smile, "Just like us." But he hadn't remembered what I said after. If love isn't pure, then it has no reason to exist. Before being abandoned by my parents, I had experienced pure love too. But over time, that love became mixed with other complexities, like sugar tainted with shards of glass, sweet but bloody. "I'm just tired. I zoned out for a moment," I replied perfunctorily. His phone rang and he became busy replying to messages, not noticing anything unusual about me. I whispered softly, "Nick, I'm tired. Let's go back." Nick looked up and I caught the faint reflection in his glasses. It was a picture of a woman. He hesitated, as if weighing something in his mind. After a moment, he finally said, "Helen, one of my business partners happens to be here. Could you head back first?" Seeing my silence, he uneasily hooked his finger around mine. "Sorry, Helen, don't be angry. This business partner is really important. Next time, how about I take you to climb a snowy mountain?" I shook my head. "It's okay. From now on, nothing about you will concern me anymore." He leaned closer, intending to kiss me. "I'll be back after handling things." Without hesitation, I turned my head away and walked off. What he was handling, only he and that woman knew. As expected, my phone buzzed again with messages from that woman. They were kissing in front of the volcano, getting intimate by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the forest. "Mrs. Hemsworth, why can't you keep your man? Are you too boring? Nick always leaves me exhausted. Next time, I'll let you listen to it live so you can hear how wild your husband is with me." Even though I told myself not to care, my heart still ached as if pierced by 1,000 needles. When my phone rang, I was momentarily distracted and failed to avoid a nearby out-of-control truck. My car collided with the guardrail. It wasn't a major accident. By the time Nick arrived, I had just regained consciousness after anesthesia. He came in such a rush that his shirt was buttoned incorrectly, revealing faint lipstick marks on his chest. "Helen, are you okay? How did you end up in an accident?" He looked at my bandaged wounds with distress and guilt. He said, "It's all my fault. I shouldn't have left you alone." Just then, his phone rang again and again. He glanced at the caller ID, his expression darkening. Thoughtfully, I asked, "Is it something from work?" He opened his mouth, hesitated, then nodded, watching me cautiously with a hint of flattery. "There's an issue at the company, but if you don't want me to go, I'll stay here." Lowering my gaze, I suppressed the nausea rising within me and shook my head. "There's not much going on here anymore. You can go ahead." Before leaving, he looked back at me reluctantly, though his steps were resolute. A man whose heart has left? There's no point holding on to him. When the doctor told me I could be discharged, I went to the research institute. I said, "Doctor, I'm here to activate my bionic robot." Wearing a lab coat, he led me to a laboratory and asked, "Miss Bosch, do you have any specific requirements for the parameters of your bionic robot?" I shook my head, then suddenly asked, "Will she divorce my husband?" The doctor adjusted his glasses. "You can configure her to divorce him. Without this parameter, it'll depend on how she calculates things herself." In the end, I didn't adjust any parameters. "Miss Bosch, To maintain the experiment's integrity, please leave your phone here. The doctor handed me a different phone. This phone has an app developed by the lab. You'll be able to see what the bionic robot sees, hears, and other data. Thank you for your significant contribution to our research. Following their instructions, I entered the lab and stood in front of the bionic robot, which looked identical to me. Pressing my finger, I activated it. The bionic robot opened its eyes, lifelike and full of spirit. It was exactly like me, with no difference even in voice. Hello, I am Helen Bosch. After completing all the procedures, I headed to the airport. On the way, my phone vibrated. I instinctively thought it was another provocative message from that woman, but when I opened it, I saw it was from the lab. Miss Jamie Rhymes, your new identity has been successfully created. Wishing you a joyful rebirth.